We should finalize the arrangements for next week.
I already told them I'd be there on Tuesday.
Good. We need to make sure everything is settled before you leave.
I learned the truth the way you learn things that change you forever. Not through shouting, not through a fight, through a sentence delivered with the casual certainty of someone who thinks the world has already agreed. Your sister's family comes first. You're always last. My mother said it while clearing plates, as if she were explaining the order of dishes in the dishwasher. My father didn't even look up from his phone. My older sister lifted her glass and smiled into it. Not surprised, not embarrassed, just quietly pleased. For a second, I waited for someone to soften it, to laugh and say they didn't mean it that way, to catch themselves and apologize. No one did. I felt the heat rise to my face, then drain away, leaving a strange, cold calm behind. My first instinct was the old one. Smile, make it lighter, pretend it didn't sting. But the words had landed too cleanly. There was nothing to misunderstand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why. I didn't plead my case like I used to when I was younger and still believed fairness was something you could earn through effort. I just nodded once and said, "Good to know." The room didn't react. That was the point. This wasn't new information to them. This was simply the first time they'd said it out loud in front of me, without fear of consequences. My name is Marin Hale. I'm in my late 30s, and that was the moment my loyalty finally snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. Growing up, no one ever sat me down to explain my place. There were no explicit rules, no announcements, just patterns, repeated so often they became normal. My sister Kendra was the sun. Plans rotated around her. Holidays bent to her schedule. If she needed something, the house mobilized. If she was upset, everyone adjusted their tone. If she succeeded, it was celebrated like a family achievement. I was the steady one, the reasonable one, the one who could handle it. That phrase followed me everywhere. You're strong. You'll be fine. You don't need as much. It sounded affectionate. It was said with smiles, but it carried a silent message underneath. We don't have to worry about you. We can spend our energy elsewhere. I didn't hate them for it. Not for a long time. I told myself it was just how families worked. One child needed more, one needed less. Someone had to be easy. Someone had to be the one who didn't make a fuss. So I became that person. When I was 12 and forgot my lunch, I didn't call home. I told myself I could handle being hungry. When I was 16 and my car broke down, I didn't ask for help. I walked home in the rain and said it was fine. When I got into college, I didn't expect celebration. I expected a quick hug and a reminder to be practical. And I was practical. I paid for my education through scholarships and long shifts and exhaustion I pretended didn't touch me. I learned to manage money, to plan, to stay calm in stress, to anticipate problems before they became emergencies. My family took that as proof that they were right about me. See, she's fine. They didn't see the cost, or maybe they did and decided it wasn't their problem. Either way, I learned to keep the cost private. Years passed. I moved away, built a career in operations, the kind of job where you solve problems before people notice they exist. It fit me too well. I became the person coworkers relied on, the one who could be counted on to fix the mess without needing credit. At home, nothing changed. Phone calls were short. My updates were acknowledged and redirected. How's work? That's good. Did you hear what Kendra's dealing with now? It was always Kendra, always her pressure, her fatigue, her stress, her needs. And without realizing it, I still played my role from a distance. I covered a car repair once because she had a baby and money was tight. I paid for a few groceries when she mentioned she'd been short that week. I booked a hotel room during a family trip because it's easier if you handle it. I sent money after a late-night call from my mother, voice trembling, insisting it was just temporary. They never demanded. They didn't have to. They asked in that soft way that made refusal feel cruel. And I said yes because I was the strong one, the reliable one, the last one. That dinner, the one where my mother ranked me out loud, was supposed to be routine, a casual family meal, nothing important, yet it felt like a door closing, or maybe a door opening, revealing the hallway I'd been walking down for decades. After we ate, my mother started talking about my sister's plans: a new house, a bigger car, childcare costs. The tone was the same as always: concern mixed with pride, mixed with expectation that someone, somehow, would make it work. My father added a comment about how hard Kendra worked. He didn't have to. I existed as a function in their lives, not a person with needs. Kendra leaned toward me and said, "You're lucky, you know. You don't have kids. You have more freedom." She said it as if my life was weightless, as if the things I carried didn't count because no one had assigned them an official label. I looked at her and felt something settle into place. They didn't just overlook me. They built their comfort on my silence. When I drove home that night, the street lights blurred slightly through the windshield, not because I was crying, because my eyes were tired from holding themselves open for too long. At a red light, my phone buzzed, a text from my mother, a gentle reminder about something I needed to help with the following week. I stared at the screen. For the first time in my life, I didn't reply right away. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and kept driving. And in the quiet that followed, I felt a small, dangerous thought rise. What if I stopped being the solution? The next morning, the text was still there. My mother's reminder, sitting on my screen like a hand resting on my shoulder. Not heavy, just persistent. The kind of pressure you barely notice until you try to move away from it. I made coffee. I answered work emails. I watched the sun creep across my kitchen counter. I let the minutes pass without touching the message. By noon, there were 2 more. "Are you okay? You've been quiet." It wasn't concern, not really. It was confusion, like a machine expecting an output and getting silence instead. I didn't respond. It wasn't punishment. I wasn't trying to make anyone anxious. I was simply doing something unfamiliar. Listening to myself. For years, I told myself that what I gave was small: a little help here, a little money there, a little time. I framed it as kindness, as family duty, as something any decent person would do. But that night, after the dinner, with my mother's words still ringing in my head, I started looking at the pattern the way I look at a process failure at work. Not emotionally, logically. I pulled up my bank statements, not out of spite, out of curiosity. I searched my transfer history for my sister's name, then for my mother's, then for vendors I didn't recognize at first until memory filled in the gaps. The pediatric clinic, the car shop, the utility company, the property tax payment I'd loaned my father when he said it would be easier if I handled it. The list went further back than I expected. Small amounts that didn't feel like much individually, but together, they formed a quiet river flowing out of my life and into theirs. And like most rivers, it had carved a path so deep it became natural. I did the math. I shouldn't have, but I did. It wasn't just the money. It was the time, the travel, the emotional bandwidth, the constant readiness to respond, the way I held the family's stability in my hands and called it normal. My stomach tightened, not with anger, with realization. I wasn't being helped less because I needed less. I was being helped less because I was giving more. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. There were moments I remembered with new sharpness. The time my mother cried on the phone about a credit card bill and I transferred funds without asking details. The time my sister joked that I was basically her emergency fund. The way my father always said he'd pay me back and never did because no one treated it like a debt. When I confronted myself with these memories, something else surfaced underneath them. The language they used. "You're good with money. You're organized. You're not like your sister. You don't need much." Compliments that sounded warm but functioned like assignments. I realized I had been cast as the family's quiet infrastructure, the support beam you don't think because it's supposed to hold. At work, I would never allow a system to rely on one component without safeguards. I would call it a risk, a failure point. Yet my family had built their life exactly that way, with me as the unspoken safety net. And now that I was seeing it clearly, I began to notice something even more unsettling. They didn't just rely on me. They relied on me not noticing, because if I noticed, I might stop, and if I stopped, they would have to face what they'd been avoiding. My sister's spending, my parents enabling, the way family first always meant someone else first. Over the next few days, I watched the requests roll in, subtle and routine. A link to a school fundraiser, a comment about how expensive groceries had gotten, a quick favor that somehow always ended up being an afternoon. No one asked directly for money. They dropped hints like breadcrumbs, confident I'd follow them. I started to understand that my sister's power in the family wasn't just emotional, it was financial. She didn't have to control the money because she controlled the narrative. She was the one with the hard life, the one with the real responsibilities, the one who needed support, and I was the one who could handle it. That was the equation. The hardest part wasn't the anger, it was the grief. The realization that my family didn't see me as someone to protect. They saw me as someone to use, lightly, politely, with smiles, so they could keep thinking they were good people. One evening, my father called. His voice was casual, as if nothing had happened at the dinner. "Hey," he said, "your sister's got some stuff going on. We might need you to help with a few things this month." Need. The word tightened my throat. I almost said yes out of habit. The reflex rose fast, eager to keep peace. Then I remembered my mother's sentence, "You're always last," and suddenly the peace they wanted felt less like peace and more like obedience. "I'll think about it," I said. There was a pause, subtle but telling. "Okay," my father replied, too quickly. "Just let us know." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not because I was scared of them, because I was scared of who I would become if I stopped being predictable. That night, I opened a new bank account. I transferred a portion of my savings into it. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't revenge, it was separation. I changed my passwords. I removed shared access. I reviewed automatic payments and canceled the ones that were not mine. Each click felt like a small betrayal, and also like breathing. I understood something then, something I had never allowed myself to consider. The person they called strong had been strong for them. Now I needed to be strong for me, and that meant preparing for the moment when I would finally say the word I had avoided my entire life. No. The first no didn't come with a speech. It came in a message thread on an ordinary weekday, right between a question about work and a picture of my niece holding a craft project. My sister texted, "Hey, can you cover the daycare deposit? Just for this month. I'll pay you back." Just for this month. I'll pay you back. The words were familiar, packaged like a promise, softened by the idea that refusing would hurt children, not adults. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could already feel the old guilt rising, that instinct to protect everyone from discomfort, that instinct to keep the peace by absorbing the impact myself. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved as it always did, people living their lives, people saying no and surviving it. I thought about my bank statements, about the quiet river of my money, about my mother's sentence, about how the ranking was never accidental, it was maintained. I picked up the phone again and typed 2 words. I can't. No explanation, no apology, no alternate solution. I stared at the message for a full minute before hitting send, as if the act of sending it might trigger an alarm in the universe. It didn't. At first, there was nothing. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I almost convinced myself she would accept it, that maybe she would simply find another way. Then the response came. "What do you mean you can't? It's not even that much." There it was. Not concern, not curiosity, the first crack in the mask. I didn't reply immediately. I put my phone in my bag, went back to my workday, sat through meetings, answered questions. My heart beat a little faster than usual, but nothing else changed. At lunch, my mother called. Her voice was too gentle. "Sweetheart," she said, "your sister told me you're stressed. Is everything okay?" The way she said stressed sounded like an accusation dressed as care. "I'm fine," I said. A pause. She waited for the part where I would confess, apologize, explain, offer to fix it. When I didn't, she filled the silence. "You know she's under pressure," my mother said. "Kids, bills, everything. She really needs support right now." I watched a man at the next table unwrap a sandwich, ordinary life continuing. I realized I had been living as if my family's needs were emergencies and my needs were optional. "I understand she's under pressure," I said, slowly, "but I can't cover it." My mother's breath caught, just slightly. "Why?" she asked. "Did something happen?" Yes, I thought. Something happened. You said out loud that I'm always last, and you expected me to keep smiling. But I didn't say that. Not yet. "I'm busy," I said, "and I'm making changes." "Changes?" my mother repeated, as if it were a dangerous word. That afternoon, my sister called. When I didn't answer, she left a voicemail. Her voice was louder than usual, sharper. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you can't just disappear when people need you." People. She didn't say family. She didn't say me. She said people, like I belonged to the world as a public utility. A second voicemail arrived an hour later, softer, more strategic. "Look, I'm sorry if I was rude. I'm just overwhelmed. Please, just this once." I felt my chest tighten. The manipulation was familiar too. Anger, then softness, pressure, then guilt, a cycle designed to pull me back into my role. I forced myself to breathe. At work, I could spot patterns in data. I could see what repeated and what it meant. My family's behavior was no different. I started documenting, not because I planned to confront them with it, but because I wanted to prove it to myself. Dates, amounts, messages, the language they used when they asked, the timing of it, always after I had a win or a calm period, as if my stability offended them unless it benefited them. That night, my father called again. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't mention my injury from the dinner, because there was no injury in this storyline. This was a different kind of damage. He went straight to the point. "Your mother's upset. She thinks you're pulling away. You need to talk to your sister." Need. Another assignment. Something in me hardened, clean and quiet. "I don't need to," I said. My father fell silent. I could almost hear him recalculating, trying to find the right tone that would bring me back. He was used to solving things by pushing me gently into compliance. "Don't do this," he said finally. "We're family." Family. A word that had always meant obligation for me and comfort for them. I am family, and I'm done being treated like the last option. The line went quiet. In that silence, I felt my fear flare, then settle. Not fear of them, fear of the unknown that comes when you stop being who everyone expects you to be. But beneath it was something stronger. Relief. The first no didn't destroy anything. It simply exposed what had been holding the family together. Me. And now that I had proven I could refuse, I knew the next phase was coming. They would escalate. They would test the boundary. They would try to make my no feel like cruelty. That was what families like mine did when the quiet one finally stopped being quiet. And this time, I was ready. They didn't accept the boundary. They studied it. At first, they tried polite persistence, a new request worded slightly differently, a reminder about how hard things were, a mention of the kids, always the kids, as if motherhood made my sister immune to accountability and turned me into a villain for choosing myself. When that didn't work, they changed tactics. My mother stopped calling to check on me and started calling to update me on emergencies. Not real emergencies, emotional ones. "Your sister is crying. She's not sleeping. She feels abandoned." My father sent a text about how disappointed he was. It wasn't angry. It was worse than anger. It was moral. "I never thought you'd be like this." Like this, as if refusing to pay someone else's bill was a personality defect. I kept my responses short. I'm sorry she's stressed. I hope she figures it out. I can't help. Each message I sent felt like stepping onto ice that held, even though I expected it to crack. They began to notice what I had been doing quietly for years. I stopped covering the gaps. That's what changed everything. A week later, my mother called, breathless. Your sister's card got declined, she said. She's at the pharmacy. She needs you. I pictured my sister standing at a counter expecting the world to rearrange itself around her embarrassment. I waited a beat. What does she need? I asked. A transfer, my mother said quickly. Just a small one. She'll pay it back. There it was again, the language of temporary sacrifice, as if my money didn't have a future. I can't, I said. My mother's voice sharpened. You can, you just won't. She finally said the truth. I felt my throat tighten, not from guilt, but from the weight of years, the years I had spent confusing my compliance with love. You're right, I said quietly. I won't. Silence. Then my mother's tone shifted into something cold. I don't recognize you, she said. I almost laughed because for the first time, I recognized myself. The next day, my sister showed up in my apartment. No warning, no call. She buzzed my door like she had every right to enter my life whenever she wanted. When I opened it, she stood there with her arms crossed, blonde hair perfect, expression controlled but furious underneath. You're really doing this, she said. I leaned against the doorframe, calm. What? Acting like you're better than us, she snapped. Acting like you're too busy to help. Her eyes flicked over my space, my quiet life, my stability, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Resentment. Not because I refused, because I had something she didn't. Peace. I'm not acting, I said. I'm setting boundaries. She laughed, sharp and dismissive. Boundaries? You sound like a therapist. I learned, I said. That landed harder than I expected. My sister's gaze tightened. Listen, she said, lowering her voice. Mom and Dad are upset. You're making things hard. You always do this, you know. You get dramatic and then you pull away. She was rewriting the story in real time, the old gaslighting repackaged for a new context. I held her gaze. You pushed me because you thought I'd fold. You asked because you assumed I'd say yes. You're not mad that I can't help. You're mad that I'm not predictable anymore. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, I saw fear flash behind the anger. Not fear of hurting me, fear of losing access. Because the truth was simple. I wasn't just family. I was the silent financier, the emergency solution, the one who made the world easier so she could keep living without consequences. Without me, she had to face herself. My mother arrived 10 minutes later, as if the family had planned the ambush. She stood behind my sister on the doorstep, eyes tired, voice already trembling with frustration. This is tearing us apart. Why are you doing this? And then, because I was done carrying the weight alone, I said the sentence I had been holding back since that dinner. Because you told me I come last, and you meant it. My mother blinked. My sister shifted, uncomfortable. My father's car pulled up behind them. Of course he came, the full team. My father stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at me like a problem to be solved. That's not what your mother meant, he said. It is. It's exactly what she meant, and I've been living like that for years. My sister scoffed. You're twisting things. I shook my head slowly. No, I'm finally naming them. The air between us felt thick. The old version of me would have filled that space with apologies. I would have reassured them. I would have softened the truth so they could keep believing they were good people. This time, I didn't. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your emergency fund. I'm not the person you call when you've run out of options. My mother's eyes filled with tears. but I watched carefully. Not all tears are remorse. Some are panic. My father's jaw tightened. So what? You're cutting us off? I'm not cutting you off. I'm cutting off the access you think you're entitled to. My sister's face flushed. You're selfish, she spat. There it was, the final weapon, the word designed to crush women like me back into service. I felt it sting, but it didn't land like it used to. Maybe, I said, or maybe I'm just done being selfish in a way that only benefits you. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of a system collapsing. They had built their comfort on my compliance. They had mistaken my quietness for weakness. They never considered that I might stop. Now they were standing at my door, confronted with the one thing they could not argue with, my refusal. And in that moment, I felt the power shift fully into my hands. Not because I had taken anything, because I had finally stopped giving it away. They didn't apologize the next day, or the next week. I think people imagine these stories end with a dramatic phone call, a sudden change of heart, tears and accountability, and a family that finally learns. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter, and in a way, more honest. They adjusted because they had to. My sister found a way to cover her own deposit. My parents started paying their own bills on time. The emergencies became less frequent when there was no longer a guaranteed solution waiting on the other end of a phone call. It wasn't that they stopped needing help. It was that they stopped expecting it from me. For a while, the silence between us felt like punishment. My mother would send short texts. Holidays passed without invitations. When I did show up, the warmth was thin, as if affection had become a bargaining chip. And I noticed something else. When I wasn't funding their piece, they didn't know how to include me. That realization hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted my money to buy love, but because it proved the role I had played. I had been valuable to them, but not for who I was. I was valuable for what I provided. So I mourned. Not them, exactly. I mourned the fantasy that if I gave enough, they would finally choose me first. I mourned the version of myself who kept trying to earn a place at a table that had already assigned her a corner. During that time, I built my life more carefully than I ever had. I saved, I traveled, I spent money on things that made my days softer, not on things that kept other people afloat. I took a class I'd always wanted to take and never allowed myself. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to learn a language I had never been taught. The language of boundaries, of self-trust, of saying no without performing guilt. And as I grew steadier, I understood the deepest twist of this story. They called me strong because they admired me. They called me strong because it was convenient. It meant they could lean on me without asking how heavy it was. It meant they could prioritize someone else and tell themselves I would be fine. Strength in that family had been another form of silence. The quietest payback wasn't revenge. It wasn't watching them struggle and smiling. It was refusing to participate in the system that kept me small. It was rebuilding a life where my value wasn't measured by how useful I was. One evening, months later, my mother called. Her voice was hesitant. "I miss you," she said. I held the phone and let the words sit. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't rush to fix anything. I didn't promise a reunion that would require me to shrink again. "I miss you too," I said, honestly, "but I can't go back to how it was." She didn't argue, not this time. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was learning. Maybe she simply understood she had lost the old version of me. We talked for a few minutes, carefully, like two people learning new rules. When the call ended, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized something that made my chest ache and lift at the same time. I was no longer last. not because they promoted me, because I stopped accepting that position. If you've ever been called strong when what people really meant was silent, I want you to remember this. Being dependable can become a trap if it's the only reason people keep you close. Your kindness is not a debt. Your stability is not public property. And saying no does not make you cruel. It makes you free. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment and tell me what part hit the hardest. Like the video if you've ever been treated as the backup plan, and subscribe to Waters Payback for more stories where quiet strength finally takes control.